In this lecture, I'm going to talk about clarity at the sentence level with a focus on concision. This is based on Williams and Biza book Style, The Basics of Clarity and Grace, 5th edition, chapter 8. Let's start with an example. In my personal opinion, it is necessary that we should not ignore the opportunity to think over each and every suggestion offered. Now, in this sentence, there are a lot of words that can be removed without really changing the meaning. We could just say, we should consider each suggestion. The second version, we'll say, is much more concise. It's using less words than the first version. Is it communicating the same thing? Well, this is an important point to make right off the bat. The first version, it has some nuance that the second version doesn't have. For example, it hedges what it's saying by saying it's in my personal opinion, whereas the second version is much stronger. By taking out in my personal opinion, it's more forceful. Okay? Now, if you intend to have that nuance, if that was intentional, then of course, by all means, you should keep those extra words. But what happens so often is that the nuance that's created is not actually intentional. It's just extra words that are not adding anything important. And in that case, you should really revise into the second sentence. Why do we want to be more concise? Well, there are several results that we want to achieve. One is we get sentences that are more maneuverable. In other words, if we want to revise it further, we might be able to do it much more effectively once the sentence has less words. Second, it's more direct. The point is clearer to the reader because it's not obfuscated by a lot of words. It's easier for the reader to get through, so less mental energy that the reader needs to exert. And for those of us writing papers that have page limits, like conference submissions in computer science, this helps us keep the word count down. There are 6 principles that we'll cover in more detail in the upcoming slides. These are: 1, you can delete words that mean little or nothing. 2, you can delete words that repeat the meaning of other words. 3, you can delete words that are implied by other words. 4, you can replace a phrase with a word. 5, you can change negatives to affirmatives. And 6, you can delete useless adjectives and adverbs. The first principle is to delete meaningless words. These includes kind of, actually, particular, really, certain, various, virtually, individual, basically, generally, given, practically. Now, sometimes, of course, these words are important to the meaning, but often they're just kind of like verbal tics. Like when I speak, I use the word like. A lot of people do that, and nothing is lost by removing it from our speech. Similarly, we have these tics, but in writing, we just feel somehow like filling a blank space with these words. So let's read an example. Productivity actually depends on certain factors that basically involve psychology more than any particular technology. I'm putting in italics words that can be safely removed. Productivity depends on certain factors that basically involve psychology more than any particular technology. Right. So we can remove those words and we pretty much get the same meaning. Productivity depends on factors that involve psychology more than on technology. In fact, it's now a bit more clear. One of the positive effects of concision I mentioned before is it gives us further opportunities to revise the sentence. So by removing a lot of these meaningless words, something new comes out, some other way to improve the sentence becomes visible. In this case, for example, when we say the productivity depends on factors that involve psychology, we might notice that factors that involve is also meaningless here. We can just say productivity depends on psychology more than on technology. The second category is to delete words that repeat the meaning of other words. For example, I have full and complete confidence in you. I hope and trust you're well. Any and all individuals. I know this to be true and accurate. Each and every one of you. Basic and fundamental properties. All of these contain two words, but they're redundant. They're just repeating, and we can just remove one of them. Again, there is some nuance in having these two words, and if you really mean to make a distinction between things that are full and things that are complete, there's some kind of subtle difference there that you want to stress, fine, you can keep this, of course. But most of the time people use this, again, like a verbal tick to fill space on a page. Are there any computer science examples you can think of? One thing that comes to mind is when people say that their algorithm is fast and efficient. The third category is to delete words implied by other words. And this has three subcategories that I'll describe. These are all things that readers can infer. The first subcategory are redundant modifiers. Let's look at some common redundancies. A terrible tragedy. Well, usually tragedies are terrible. You don't usually have a fun tragedy. Very is different. A free gift. Again, gift is by definition free. Basic fundamentals. Future plans. Plans are always for the future. Each individual. Final outcome. An outcome is by definition final. True facts. Consensus of opinion. Consensus is by definition to do with opinions. Let's look at an example. Do not try to predict future events that will completely revolutionize society, because past history shows that it is the final outcome of minor events that unexpectedly surprises us more. I've highlighted in red words that can just be safely removed. Predicting future events, and while predictions are usually of things in the future, so you can just say predict events. Will completely revolutionize society? Well, revolutions are by their nature complete. They're not small affairs. So you can safely remove the word completely. Because past history, well, history is always in the past, so we can remove past. Shows that is the final outcome. Final can be removed. Minor events that unexpectedly surprises us more. Well, surprise is by definition unexpected, so those words can be removed. The second subcategory is to delete what readers can infer, that is, in redundant categories. An example is when you say large in size, or round in shape, or honest in character. A good example, round in shape. Well, by saying round in shape, something is round in shape, you're clarifying that it's round, that the roundness belongs to some category. It's used to describe the shape. Now, it's quite redundant. Usually, round is assumed to describe something in shape. Or honest in character. Well, someone is honest, it belongs to the category character without needing to specify. For example here, during that period of time, the membrane area became pink in color and shiny in appearance. Well, the most obvious here is pink in color. Well, it's not pink in shape and it's not pink in the way it sounds. Obviously it's in color. So in color can be removed. It's a redundant category. The membrane area, so in this context at least, membrane obviously refers to an area. during that period of time, again, the period here, it's referring to time even if you don't have this of time. And shiny in appearance, as similar to the other example, something is shiny while you're talking about its appearance, not really its shape. Okay? So all of these can be removed. Now, sometimes it's true you kind of have these things to stress the word time or to emphasize something. And this goes back to what I said earlier. When we make these simplifications, we do lose some kind of nuance. And you have to ask yourself, was that nuance something you intended? Was it necessary? Or is it just there because you needed to fill space on a page? Now in this example, it's quite nice. You just remove the words and you're done. But usually you have to modify the sentence a bit. Let's look here at this example. The holes must be aligned in an accurate manner. Well, here manner is a category describing what accuracy refers to. It's unambiguous what accuracy refers to. It's not accuracy in measurement of time or something like this. But you can't just remove the word manner because accurate is an adjective modifying manner. To do this, you have to turn accurate into an adverb that modifies aligned. So you say the holes must be aligned accurately. And here accurately is an adverb. Sometimes you need to change that adjective into a noun, not an adverb. Let's see an example. The country manages the educational system and public recreational activities. Here, the educational system can just be replaced with education. So the system is a redundant category, but educational is an adjective, and it turns into a noun in order to make the new sentence work. Similarly, recreational activities is just recreation. So you can rewrite, the country manages education and public recreation. The third and final subcategory is just kind of a catch-all for other more complicated scenarios. So here's an example. Imagine someone trying to learn the rules for playing the game of chess. Now, I'm highlighting here things that are not really necessary. So imagine someone trying to learn the rules of chess. Well, if someone is learning the rules of chess, it's kind of clear that they're trying. That's what learning is about. The game of chess here, it's actually a redundant category because chess is a game. So we can remove game. And when you talk about rules for playing chess, well, what else are the rules for? It's for playing. So this becomes redundant as well. You can rewrite this saying, imagine learning the rules of chess. The fourth category is when you can identify a whole phrase in a sentence that can actually be expressed as a single word. Let's read again. Let's read this sentence here. As you carefully read what you have written to improve wording and catch errors of spelling and punctuation, the thing to do before anything else is to see whether you could use sequences of subjects and verbs instead of the same ideas expressed in nouns. So I've highlighted in red and blue two phrases that can each be replaced with a single word. The red, carefully read what you have written to improve wording and catch errors of spelling and punctuation. There's actually one word that captures this. It's edit. As you edit. And then the thing to do before anything else is to. We can just say first. So as you edit, first see whether you could use sequences of subjects and verbs instead of the same ideas expressed in nouns. You can continue here. What are sequences of subjects and verbs? In this context, it's talking about clauses. Whether you could use clauses instead of the same ideas expressed in nouns. And what about the same ideas expressed in nouns? We've learned that there's a word for this, nominalizations. So as you edit, first see whether you could use clauses instead of nominalizations. There's more. When you say see whether you could use something instead of something else, you could say to replace nominalizations with clauses. So you've gotten a much shorter sentence. As you edit, first replace nominalizations with clauses. This sentence is much more manageable for the reader to quickly get through rather than this one that's about 4 times or 5 times as long. There are some examples that occur often that I'll highlight here. The reason for the delay in X, you can say why X is delayed. Despite the fact that, even though. In the event that we go shopping, if we go shopping. In a situation where I am on the road, when I'm on the road. Concerning the matter of courses, about courses. There is a need for resilience. You must be resilient. We are in a position to make advances. We can make advances. It is possible that nothing will come of this. Nothing may come of this. Prior to the end of X, before X ends. And a decrease in the number of, fewer. The fifth principle of concision is changing negatives to affirmatives. Main ideas: do not write in the negative, write in the affirmative. That is, unless for some reason you want to stress the negative. But as a default, writing in the affirmative uses less words than writing in the negative. For example, instead of saying not careful, you can say careless. Not many, you can say few. Not the same, different. Not often, you can say rarely. Not allow, you can say prevent. Not stop, you can say continue. Not notice, you can say overlook. Not include, you can say omit. Some words are implicitly negative. They don't use not plus something. They are in their core negative words. You want to avoid combining these together. You don't want to have double negatives. So here's a sentence that's pretty hard to parse. Except when you have failed to submit applications without documentation, benefits will not be denied. So there's several negatives going on here. Except, this is one of those things that are implicitly negative. When you have failed to submit without, will not deny. Okay. So in this case, I think the main culprits here are except and failed. You can fix it. So you can fix other things. So instead of saying benefits will not be denied, you can say you will receive benefits. Notice we're doing other things in the sentence where we are changing the order of the clauses. So you will receive benefits, and now we're kind of unrolling this negations to say only if you submit your documents. So we've gotten rid of the without documentation and turned this whole thing into what happens when you do submit with documents. The sixth and final principle of concision is to delete useless adjectives and adverbs. So I'll read through this example and I'll tell you in advance, highlighting in red, these are things that could probably be deleted completely. At the heart of the argument culture is our habit of seeing issues and ideas as absolute and reconcilable principles continually at war. To move beyond this static and limiting view, we can remember the Chinese approach to yin and yang. They are two principles, yes, but they are conceived not as reconcilable polar opposites, but as elements that coexist and should be brought into balance as much as possible. As sociolinguist Suzanne Wang Skolin notes, yin is always present in and changing into yang and vice versa. How can we translate this abstract idea into daily practice? We can go through each of these red things one by one to see that we could probably delete all of them without really changing the meaning. Now, here's some exercises for you to do offline. First exercise, prune the redundancy from the sentence. In regard to desirable employment and teaching jobs, prospects for those engaged in graduate school level studies are at best not certain. If you don't see much to prune right away, try to proceed iteratively. So first, find something you can small, even if it's just one thing. Remove the redundancy, and then hopefully even more redundancies will start to jump out at you from the paper. Second exercise, take the following sentence and, where appropriate, change negatives to affirmatives. You can also keep on editing anything more that you think will improve concision or even line up with other principles of clarity that we learned in other lectures. The sentence is, no agreement exists on the question of an open or closed universe, a dispute about which no resolution is likely as long as a computation of the total mass of the universe has not been done. The final exercise is to revise the sentence using local changes to improve concision. In the period known to scholars and historians as the Renaissance, increases in affluence and stability in the area of political affairs had the consequence of allowing streams of thoughts of different kinds to merge and flow together. When it comes to concision, one common aspect that comes up is about meta-discourse and whether we can remove meta-discourse or not. So meta-discourse is something that tells us the writer's intention or gives directions to the reader, or it's the structure of the text, guiding us through the structure of the text. These are things that are self-referential to the text itself. For example, when you say, to sum up, I make some conclusion, blah, 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 blah. Or when you say candidly, I believe something, something. These are statements that involve the writer and are telling us about the writer's intentions about what they're going to say. You can also have directions to the reader, like note that, or consider now something, or as you see something. Or it might be referring to the structure of the text, giving us an arc a structure of how things are organized. Like saying things like first, blah, 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 second, blah, 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 or finally, therefore. However, these are words that can reflect on the structure of the text rather than be part of what the text is conveying explicitly. Meta-discourse is necessary. These are useful things, but sometimes it's possible to overdo it. Okay? And in that case, you want to edit for concision. Let's look at a few examples. The last point I would like to make is that in regard to men-women relationships, it is important to keep in mind that the greatest changes have occurred in how they work together. I'm putting in italics things that are meta-discourse that's really not necessary. Most of the time you can just remove this without losing anything and say the greatest changes in men-women relationships have occurred in how they work together. Okay, so you can remove those things and rewrite the sentence a bit to get something more concise. Nice thing is that once you remove the meta discourse, you can maybe even look at it through the lens of the other principles we talked about. So here, what's the subject? Changes. Well, what's the character? Men and women. So there's a disagreement. And you can rewrite the sentence using the revision protocol. You can get men and women have changed their relationships most in how they work together. Another example. In regard to a vigorous style, the most important feature is a short, concrete subject followed by a forceful verb. This in regard to a vigorous style is partially meta-discourse. So in regard to is giving us meta-discourse. Vigorous style may be something you do want to retain in the sentence. You can rewrite the sentence to remove this meta-discourse, but retain the vigorous style inside the sentence. So you can say the most important feature of a vigorous style is a short, concrete subject followed by a forceful verb. And the final example, so far as China's industrial development is concerned, it has long surpassed that of Japan. Here, so far as is concerned is meta-discourse, and you can remove it and just say China has long surpassed Japan's industrial development. Notice once you remove the meta-discourse, you can actually edit the sentence further for clarity. Here's some exercises for you to do offline. The first is a very simple one, to edit these two sentences to remove unnecessary meta-discourse. High divorce rates have been observed to occur in areas that have been determined to have low population density. And this section introduces another problem, that of noise pollution. The first thing to say about it is that noise pollution exists not only in blah, blah, blah. The second exercise, it's a little harder. Again, edit the sentence for unnecessary discourse and redundancy. Depending on the particular position that one takes on this question, the educational system has taken on a degree of importance that may be equal to, or perhaps even exceed, the family as a major source of transmission of social values. A very common form of meta-discourse is called a hedge. A hedge is something that signals uncertainty. These are words like usually, often, sometimes. For example, we sometimes outperform other algorithms versus saying we outperform other algorithms. Okay, it signals that we're not always outperforming. It's kind of a humbleness or something about uncertainty. So there are virtually no other algorithms for this problem. By adding virtually, you're signaling that maybe there's something that someone could claim it's an algorithm for the problem, but you don't believe it. So this is an example of a hedge. Most, many, some, a certain number of, or verbs like may, might, can, could, etc., etc. Now, a little hedging is usually good, but too much hedging is redundant and usually can be removed and is unnecessary. For example, there seems to be some evidence to suggest that certain differences between Japanese and Western rhetoric could derive from historical influences, possibly traceable to Japan's cultural isolation and Europe's history of cross-cultural contacts. Take a look here for a second to identify words that are hedging. You can pause if you want to have a little more time. Okay, I'm going to put in italics the words that are hedging. There seems to be some evidence to suggest that certain differences could derive, possibly traceable. Okay. So we can remove those hedges and say this evidence suggests that aspects of Japanese and Western rhetoric differ because of Japan's cultural isolation and Europe's history of cross-cultural contacts. Notice we still have some hedging, so the evidence is not telling us something for sure. It's suggesting, and it's not telling us something about all of rhetoric. It's just some aspects of it. Okay, so it's good. We gave a little hedging, but we didn't overdo it. Okay. Now, why do you want to hedge? Well, one reason is you're not completely sure about something. Either like here, either this is kind of a scientific way of saying, well, we don't have the full evidence, we don't have a proof, we just have something that suggests a conclusion. Sometimes it's just things that you think are true. For example, there are no algorithms for this problem, but you're not completely sure because who knows, maybe you're missing some literature. So you can say there are virtually no algorithms, or there do not appear to be any algorithms for this problem. In the context of peer review, it's actually a good idea to hedge, because if you make a strong statement like this approach has never been taken, it's gonna be easy for a reviewer to find some counterexample to your claim. Assuming one exists somewhere, you missed it, the reviewer knows about it, so they're much more likely to object to this kind of sentence and say, well, the author doesn't know really the literature or what they're talking about. On the other hand, if you hedge things a bit, most papers have not taken this approach. Now, if the reviewer has like one counterexample in mind, it doesn't destroy your statement. So it's kind of safer to say something that's hedged like this. Now, if you're like 100% sure, of course you can make this strong statement, but most of the time you do have some doubt. Another type of common meta discourse is the opposite of hedging, the intensifier. Unlike hedging, which signals uncertainty, an intensifier signals certainty. For example, using words like very, quiet, rather, clearly, obviously, undoubtedly, etc., etc. We show, we prove, we establish. It is obvious that, etc., etc. Okay. Here, again, sometimes it's important to use intensifiers to stress something, but you also probably don't want to be redundant and overdo it. Just as an exercise to do offline, take a look at this sentence and use intensifiers and hedges to come up with two different versions. One where you use only intensifiers and one where you use only hedging. The sentence is blank. Americans believe that the federal government is blank, intrusive, and blank authoritarian. So try to replace blank with either hedges in one version or intensifiers in another. When you do that, compare how differently the two sentences sound to each other.